Welcome to the Not Old Better Show. I'm your host, Paul Vogelzang. We have a great year-end show today, and my guest is author, speaker, leader, Marc Miller. Marc Miller's career has spanned 30-plus years at IBM, thriving tech startups. Marc worked as a high school math teacher, and Marc was involved in a near-fatal bicycle accident that changed his perspective forever. Throughout Marc's wandering the proverbial career desert, often repeating some of the same mistakes over and over, Marc learned his most crucial lesson. Most people don't really know what makes them happy at their core, what fulfills them. They pursue money, status, a skill set, all of which provide some level of satisfaction, but not contentment. People wind up feeling frustrated, even trapped. Others have figured out what they need, but they don't know how to chart a course to get there. Marc Miller and his company, CareerPivot, help the baby boom generation create this successful, fulfilling path and course to get to where they want to be. Marc's books, his workshops, his speaking, resources, podcasts, and Marc's stated strategy is to work with those of us in the second half of life who want to change. Marc is going to answer some questions for us today, of course, like, does the idea of career change overwhelm you? Do you feel trapped in your career? And do you fear it's too late to even make a career change? Welcome to the show, Marc Miller.
Well, Marc, I've been to the website CareerPivot.com, and I'm thoroughly impressed with your work, your success, your various resources there on the site, and your brand. And I want to talk about creating a professional brand that people will remember. But first, let's give some context for everybody listening. And Marc, we're talking mid-December 2016. The holidays are approaching. The New Year holiday in particular is a time for resolutions and change. Your workshops, your speaking, all of your books and resources and podcasts, all of that has this very stated strategy about working with those of us, and I'm in this group too, in the second half of our lives who want to change. So tell us a little bit more about the change, certainly your work at CareerPivot, and how you kind of allay concerns over this feeling, these kind of questions that naturally come up about being overwhelmed by a possible career change, or maybe you feel trapped in your present career and you want to change but aren't quite sure how. And then maybe some of us even fear that it's too late to make a change. So please jump in and tell us a little bit about yourself and CareerPivot.
Sure. I like to label myself a recovering engineer. Yes, they have a 12-step program for that. I spent the first 22 years at IBM. I spent all of them here in Austin, Texas. So we joke that IBM stand for I've been moved. I didn't move. And I spent 22 years wandering around IBM. Made multiple career changes within IBM, which back in the 70s and 80s was quite acceptable. In fact, big companies encourage you to do that. And then in 99, they screwed me on my pension, and I said goodbye and went to work for a successful startup, semiconductor startup. We were bought out by Lucent, as most of our people in our generation, because Lucent at the time was the most widely held stock in the world. It blew up. And then on July 11th of 2002, I'm a big-time cyclist. I came down a hill at about 25 miles an hour, turned into a blind turn, and hit a 96 Toyota Corolla head-on.
I have to tell you, I saw the picture of the bike. I had a Bianchi bike too. I know that they are steel fortresses, and that picture of the bike just almost made me wince, Marc. It was terrible.
I joke the fact that it wasn't no namby-pamby carbon fiber or aluminum frame. It was a heavy-duty steel touring frame.
Yeah.
And it was crushed.
Yeah.
I spent 5 days in the trauma center. I tore up a knee, I broke a hip, I dislocated a shoulder, broke a bunch of ribs,
Oh, gosh.
broke the clavicle. I had imprints of the pads in the helmet on my head.
Oh, Mark.
But I had no internal injuries and no brain injuries I'm willing to admit to. They had me walking on crutches in 3 days. I was back on a bike in 10 weeks, flying back to China in 4 months. Oh, I flew right smack into the middle of the SARS epidemic.
Wow.
And that's what I refer to as my WTF moment. Why am I doing this?
Mm-hmm.
So I went off and taught high school math for 2 years at an inner city high school. I was very successful. I could not do that and stay healthy. I then went off and did a year of fundraising of all places for the Jewish Community Center. As I joke, being a non-Jew, being the face of a Jewish organization is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Then I joke, I relapsed, went back into another tech startup. And then I started CareerPivot as I was watching many of my friends being wiped out in one of the last 2 recessions.
Mm-hmm.
And I have almost, it seems, seamlessly gone from skill to job, transitioning skills. And that's where we came up with the term career pivot.
Mm-hmm. I do that. I love that name.
It's not about making these big leaps. It's about transitioning and repurposing skills to get to the next step.
Mm-hmm.
And that next step isn't always the final place. I've got several examples of that, but it's to move you in that proper direction.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us, we have families to feed, mortgages to pay. We have to put food on the table. I think at the beginning of my podcast, it's not about jumping out of the fire into the frying pan.
Mm-hmm. So in your particular case, you pivoted. You're working on something that you really truly believe in. Maybe you weren't necessarily part of that faith, but you were doing something that was a kind of a fit. Is that kind of how you're looking at the word pivot?
I spent a good bit of time at the end of my career at IBM in sales or in sales support. So I was very familiar. And when I left teaching, I was looking at fundraising. And I was just looking for a job in fundraising. And the J was a place there, and it was a good opportunity to build a corporate development program. Mm-hmm. What I learned is I cannot handle the dysfunctionality of nonprofits. Mm-hmm. I've served on a lot of boards, and the decision-making process within nonprofits, which is mostly consensus-based, is just really too slow for me. Mm-hmm. And I've done several blog posts on career failures. In fact, I've got a chapter in my next book on career failures and how to recover from them. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I discovered is if I'm going to fail, I want to fail fast. Mm-hmm. And which is what I did at the J. I decided after 6 months, you know what? This was not a good choice. So I planned my way out. It took 6 months before I left, but I very carefully planned my way out. And I didn't hold on saying, I got to keep this job because if I fail, this will be horrible, which is a lot of in our, failure is not an option is a mantra in our generation.
Sure.
But if you go to Silicon Valley it's fail often, fail fast, mm-hmm. and just keep on trying. Mm-hmm. And that's to some extent a mentality that we need to somewhat pick up, because that's what our kids are doing. Mm-hmm. They need to just go try things. And in many ways, many of us are thrown into the same position we were when we were 21. When we were 21, we knew we had to work for 40 more years. Mm-hmm. We had no money. We had no stuff. And we just had to figure things out. Mm-hmm. For many of us, I'm over 60 now. For many, we have no money, and we're going to have to work 20 more years. Mm-hmm. And we've got to figure things out.
Mm-hmm. And so I would imagine that, because you're very proud to say that you're on your 7th pivot now, And so making some of these transitions into, kind of some of these next steps is a matter of perspective, but it's also taking what you've learned and almost leveraging it a bit into what might come next based on a variety of things that you might be juggling. You might want something that you're very committed to and passionate about, and you might want something that you just can go into and earn some money.
Yeah, it's right now, as I said, most of us, we're not oriented to take big risks. And so that's when you start taking what I call pivots.
Mm-hmm.
I claim every one of my career changes has been a half-step career change.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, I had 1 foot in the old world, 1 foot in the new world, and more importantly, there was always a relationship there
Mm-hmm.
that took me across. In other words, I never did it alone.
Mm-hmm.
So even going into the career pivot business that I am in now, I came out of learning and development and technology. Well, learning and development and the kind of, I don't really call what I do coaching, it's more training, it's a very natural transition.
Mm-hmm.
It's no different than when I came out of the training world and went to teach high school math. So I was, for example, I was blessed in my career. I've taught in almost 40 different countries. And when I got into the high school I was in, it was my kids, 95% of my kids were economically disadvantaged, i.e. free and reduced lunch.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found was I was walking into yet another culture, a culture of poverty. And I had to, once again, adapt to that culture. I can train engineers in China.
Mm-hmm.
Then I can adapt to these kids. So, yes, I mean, everything kind of, it's learning how to kind of make those transitions.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a lot of clients where I always tell them, the next place is not the landing point, particularly after you've been laid off. Wherever you land after a layoff is usually never the optimal place. It's you need to go back to work. Someone's going to offer you work. You're going to go take it.
Well, we're with Marc Miller. Marc is founder and leader of the organization CareerPivot, and we're talking today about making some changes. Certainly, it's around the new year. But Marc, I want to jump back and touch on something that you just said, and that has to do with teaching. One of the areas that I noticed really is very much a specialty of yours, and it certainly seems to be more and more important. It's absolutely in the news. I think it's very relevant to my audience, and I think it's very relevant to those of us who want to make a change, and that's this question of multi-generational workplaces. It sure struck me as you were talking about teaching that some of your experience in understanding these different generations was having 1 foot in your own generation, but also having maybe another foot in teaching industry and gaining a perspective of what that generation, the generation of students that you were teaching, was needing, was interested in. And maybe through some of that information, you then learned about what some of the issues were, maybe even how to overcome them. And maybe that's kind of what set the stage for this ability of yours and this specialty of yours to give some perspective on multi-generation workplaces. So tell us a little bit about what we're facing today with these multi-generational workplaces.
Yeah, one of the things, as you mentioned, it's when I was teaching high school and I was teaching Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and there I was, and I realized I was teaching the same stuff in the same way that I was taught back in the early 1970s. And I was going, oh crap, these kids are not like us. They've grown up on the calculator in many ways. And by the way, I was teaching logarithms. When we were in high school, we needed to understand logarithms because we used slide rules.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going, why? The reality is, the way I like to frame the multi-generational is through this concept of generational echo effects. And that is when we all leave home, we do one of two things. We either do exactly what our parents told us to do, or do the exact opposite, and rarely anything in between. Another way you can put it is ask anyone who's raising children or who has raised kids and ask them, are you raising your children the same way you were raised? And the answer isn't just no, it's usually hell no. So I use the example, my parents' generation. My father served in World War II, as almost every male in his generation. My parents grew up through the Depression. My parents' generation knew how to save money. They saved money like crazy. They were very loyal to big government. Mm-hmm. Here I am, a baby boomer. We had Watergate in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. Did we trust the government? Heck no. Mm-hmm. By the way, we spent money like crazy. By the way, the technology that most affected our generation was 1969, Visa. We had credit cards, mm-hmm. right? So, and then we take the kids today. We were raised to be very private. We were raised to be strong individuals. We were, so what did our kids do? They created Facebook. Mm-hmm. We were raised to be hyper competitive. What did we do with them? Everyone gets a blue ribbon. Everyone gets a participation trophy, right? They are not like us. They are the echo of us. Mm-hmm. And it drives us nuts in the workplace. And as I like to say, they is the way they is because we made them that way.
Proud as we can be.
Yep. And so they're not like us. Another good example, baby boomers volunteered less than any other generation ever. By the way, our kids volunteer more than any other generation.
Yeah. Now, do you see some of that changing with your work on CareerPivot? Do you see, because one of the things I noticed on the website too were the surveys that you've done, and yes. One in particular jumped out at me. It was certainly a headline that, Ronald Reagan's year, are you better or worse off? And the focus certainly was on career. It also touched on finances and physical health and happiness level. And so are you seeing now maybe that some of kind of the baby boomer generation, maybe we're a little bit more inclined to volunteer?
Well, part of it is we are definitely changing. I like to say we thought we were going to have a 3-stage life like our parents, mm-hmm. which was education, work, and then retirement. Then they moved our cheese. And we are slowly realizing that our later years will not look like our parents. Mm-hmm. In many ways, that's better. We're not going to go to Florida and play golf and hike our pants up around our, around our navels. And one of the many boomers, and I'm one of those, I'm looking for purpose. Mm-hmm. It's one reason I left high tech. I was good at it. I just didn't want to do it anymore. Mm-hmm. And we're going to see more and more of that. My mantra is I was raised to be an employee, to go work for a father-like company. Mm-hmm. That would take care of me. Mm-hmm. And after 30 or 40 years, I would ride off into the sunset and retire. I kind of did that. And then I got well into my career and went, wow, this is not what I want. Many of us are going, wait a minute. The script, it's not following the script that was written. Mm-hmm. And by the way, we're looking at the end, and by the way, the script is not what we want.
And so we have to jump, we have to change, we have to adapt, and maybe we are going to find some purpose, and maybe we're going to find some passion. But you're also talking, And it's one of the reasons that I just so jumped at the chance to talk to you, because you're so smart about doing these things, Mark, especially about this idea of personal branding. I'm not sure I really have found anyone else who is thinking about it in just the same way that you are. And you've written this excellent book on the subject with a ton of great reviews. And it's brief, it's about 60 pages. I like that. I thought that was a real plus to it. The title is Personal Branding for Baby Boomers: What It Is, How to Manage It, and Why It's No Longer Optional. That's just this great title. And I should point out, too, to my audience that those who are Kindle Unlimited members, the book is free. Mark, that's just super generous of you. You must feel so passionate, so committed to this subject that you're just giving it away. And it's really this fantastic amount of research, landmark even. So why? What led you to this idea of branding? And why is it no longer optional? And why just give it away?
Okay. Number one, you have a brand, personal brand, whether you like it or not. I get lots of boomers saying, I'm not a brand, I'm not a product. And I say, yes, you are. I like the definition of personal brand is the definition I like the best is Jeff Bezos, CEO of Amazon, where he says, your personal brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room.
Good, bad, or indifferent.
Yes, you do have a brand. Mm-hmm. The difference is when you and I were graduating from school and growing up and going off and starting our career, our brand was largely created by our works. And it was people who knew us, the guys and gals who sat next to you. And they saw your work and the people you worked with, and they changed jobs, and your brand may have gotten bigger, but it's largely is confined to your town, your city. Today, you are literally competing for work with people from anywhere in the world. Paul, you're sitting in Virginia, I'm sitting in Austin, Texas, and we're talking just like anybody else. Mm-hmm. I have clients in Germany, UK. I've had clients in Singapore, Peru, Saudi Arabia, Switzerland, and I do it on Skype. Mm-hmm. And Skype is virtually free, right? So the world has expanded. Two, we have this thing called social media. And if you look at Facebook or LinkedIn, they're just basically publishing platforms. Mm-hmm. And people are going to say things about you. And you need to manage it. And, well, I don't need to manage it. Yes, you do. If you don't, someone will do it for you. So it's a somewhat a foreign concept for many of us because we were raised to be very private. Yeah. We don't brag. Well, yes, you do need to brag. Mm-hmm. So it's a very different concept, but it's never been easier to go out on your own. If I look at the cost, I'm in the process of publishing my third book, which is Repurpose Your Career: A Practical Guide for the Second Half of Life. Mm-hmm. And, I'm doing it for very little money. I'm self-publishing. My goal is to sell between 10 and 20,000 copies this time. And I'm sorry, I'm a recovering engineer. If I can do that, the key point here is you need to define how you want to be known for. What do you want to be known for, right? What is your brand? And you now can define that. I use the term, I'm a recovering engineer. I used to, when I worked in the technology world, I referred to myself as a geek that could speak. And the idea is you come up with that brand and you can kind of, people get it. I have a client, I'm branding her, we're working on her brand. She is a ringmaster of creatives. In other words, she's a project manager that likes dealing with photographers and art and video, and she knows how to corral creative people.
Hmm.
That's your strength.
Yeah, it's a skill.
It's also getting outside of yourself. I've had some absolutely brilliant brand stories written by, of all things, adult daughters. Our children will see things in us and be able to articulate things about us that, put bluntly, we can't do. So we have to get their help.
It's hearing those things about us when we're out of the room that makes us adapt and change and grow. Yeah. Well, Marc Miller, I really could talk to you for a long time. I hope that as you release this third book, you'll come back, because there are just so many other great things, so many wonderful things that you've discovered along your journey and your time that we could learn so much from. And so thank you very much for your time today. I'm going to put links up to where to find you, how to connect to you, and we look forward to having you back and get people interested in knowing a little bit more about how to brand themselves and how to better understand their passions and make some of these changes for 2017 in a non-stressful, comfortable way. Marc, thanks so much for your time.
Sure, no problem.
I want to especially thank Emma LaRoche and Jessica Rhodes at Interview Connections for introducing me to Marc Miller. And of course, I want to thank Marc again for his passion, his time here with us today, and for all Marc is doing to give back to help those of us in our second half of life to actually have the life that we wish for, filled with happiness and success. Thanks again, Marc.